Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Why would I want to write about this subject? The anti-Masonic sentiment seems to be out of proportion to what must be considered the importance of Freemasonry in our society today. I want to share with you some thoughts on this subject. The words in the title beg that an explanation of their meaning be explored. When I googled religious extremism and Freemasonry, the results showed 18,700 web pages. If you Google anti-Masonry, you get between 151,000 and 197,000 hits. If you Google pro-Freemasonry, you get 222,000 hits. But when you look at these sites, many of these pro-Masonry pages are anti-Masonic too. It would also appear to depend on factors unknown that these numbers change at different times. Why? What have we done to warrant this? It seems to me that most anti-Masonic feeling is expressed by a group or groups that are best described as fundamentalist or extreme. These groups are usually associated with some form of religion and not necessarily linked to any style or belief. Any attempt to try and explain Masonic esotericism to those with absolute ideas about the world that is based on literal text interpretations of the Bible, or anything else for that matter, is generally a waste of time. To them, anyone who is curious about the origin of life that might lead to questioning faith-based beliefs is heretical and probably satanic. Questions about the great mysteries of the universe and man's role in it are answered with their interpretation of the Bible or any holy book. All else is wrong. Because of this, religious fundamentalists find Freemasonry anathema. This paper aims to define the terms and explore these issues to see if it is possible to find a rational explanation for anti-Masonic activity by these fundamentalist extreme groups. What do we understand as Freemasonry? Freemasonry as an organization came into being in the Age of Enlightenment, and its members were considered free thinkers. It was not anti-religious or anti-political, but a simple curiosity at a time when established rules were not subject to challenge. These men had a desire to find out answers to questions about the universe and man's place in it. These were supposedly answered by others who had fixed dogmatic views. These free thinkers did not, however, believe they were answered correctly. This created paranoia in leaders of autocratic governments and religions. Freemasons perceived their inquiries as normal curiosity. The establishment did not, and felt that such actions were morally wrong, and condemned Freemasonry as a result. Remember that the Royal Society, with many Freemason members, also came into being around this time. They wanted answers, and found them. We all know what Freemasonry is, don't we? First, let us look what is written in Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. He states that
the definitions of Freemasonry are numerous. A more comprehensive and exact definition is that it is a science which is engaged in the search for the divine truth, and which employs symbolism as its method of instruction.
Let us now look at what a person wanting a definition would find by seeking information about Freemasonry using the Internet. The Grand Lodge of South Australia website defines Freemasonry thus.
Freemasonry is one of the world's oldest fraternal societies. is made up of men who are concerned with moral and spiritual values and who pursue a way of life that complements their religious, family, and community affiliations. They seek a better way of life and treat all men as equal, regardless of race, religion, or social standing.
From the FAQ on the Pietra Stone's website, Freemasonry is the world's largest secular, fraternal, and charitable organization. It teaches moral lessons and self-knowledge through participation in a progression of allegorical two-part plays.
Freemasonry uses the metaphors of operative stonemasons' tools and implements against the allegorical backdrop of the building of King Solomon's Temple to convey what has been described by both Masons and critics as a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols.
If you ask the question of encyclopedia.com, which utilizes a large group of online dictionaries and encyclopedias, you get Freemasonry,
teachings and practices of the secret fraternal order, officially known as the Free and Accepted Masons, or Ancient Free and Accepted Masons.
You may well be asked what is Freemasonry by an acquaintance or even a stranger. I like the explanation given by Greg Godding.
Well, that is about the hardest question any Freemason will ever be asked. But it is a question that every Freemason should have an answer for. Whatever answer you are tempted to give, never answer this question with that meaningless, to a non-Mason, phrase of a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. What does that mean anyway? There is no one easy answer to the question, what is Freemasonry? But there are many areas we can cover in order to answer the question in a meaningful way. We may start with statements such as, Freemasonry is one of the world's oldest secular fraternal societies, or Freemasonry is one of the world's oldest non-religious associations or brotherhoods. And to that question, who are the Freemasons and what do you do? A suitable answer may well be, it is a worldwide society of men who use ceremonies based on the customs of the ancient stonemasons and their tools to teach moral and spiritual values to its membership. However, this is all very hard to commit to memory, and the non-Freemason all sounds too rehearsed anyway. A far easier answer to give is by simply stating what Freemasonry means to you. Think about what Freemasonry does mean to you, and then use that as your starting point. You will always sound far more convincing when you are speaking from a point of knowledge and passion. The person who is asking the question of you will soon see through a bluff if you are not 100% confident in your answer, and so you can do yourself and the craft more harm than good. However, just as they will see through a bluff, they will identify passion and love just as readily, and it is far easier for you. Just speak from the heart, speak of what means to you, and just start talking. As you talk, you will find that all these other points will start coming to mind.
There will be, as well, many anti-Masonic websites with their definitions, some of which are so far removed from the truth that I shall ignore them. I think it could be said that the uninitiated person may get a bit confused. If that is so, then what do people with preconceived ideas about Freemasonry, which have been formulated by and fostered onto others, think? It has been shown that most people with these views have not reached them by their study, but have heard it from others. During a conversation with my daughter's brother-in-law, he made the statement, when commenting on a TV program that mentioned Freemasonry, that they were the people who worshipped the devil. This upset my daughter, who attacked him and stated that this was not true of her dad, who was a regular churchgoer. Here is an extract from what is believed to be the oldest known anti-Masonic publication. This is a quotation from a leaflet written by a Presbyterian minister named Winter in 1698. You can see it in The Complete Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry.
To all godly people in the City of London, having thought it needful to warn you of the mischiefs and evils practised in the sight of God by those called Freemasons, I say, take care lest their ceremonies and secret swearings take hold of you, and be wary that none cause you to err from godliness, for this devilish sect of men are meters in secret, which swear against all without their following. They are the Antichrist, which was to come leading men from their fear of God. For how should men meet in secret places, and with secret signs, taking care that none observe them to do the work of God? Are not these the ways of evildoers? Knowing how that God observes privily them that sit in darkness, they shall be smitten, and the secrets of their hearts laid bare. Mingle not among this corrupt people, lest you be found so at the world's conflagration.
Research Freemasonry, and you will find that there are many claims that Freemasonry is a religion. Most Freemasons do not claim this. They claim otherwise. A well-known brother, John Robinson, devotes a chapter on this subject in his book, A Pilgrim's Path. He answers the question as follows.
I've lost count of how many times I have been asked, isn't Freemasonry a separate religion? It's a question that creates a question. How in the world did anyone come to believe that Masonry is a religion? When I ask that, I am usually told by the callers that they heard the charge on an evangelist's broadcast or read it in an anti-Masonic tract or book. No one who has asked me the question has claimed to have come up with the notion from personal knowledge or experience. The basic question has been addressed over and over again. No, Masonry is not a religion. It has no intention of being a religion. It doesn't want to be a religion. But those replies rarely have any impact on non-Masons for the simple reason that the defense of Masonry is usually directed at other Masons, not at the masses who are the targets of the anti-Masonic evangelists. What is obviously needed is a broader audience for the defense. One point that is confusing to many is the frequent statement by Masonic writers that Freemasons are religious. They are, but being religious in no way carries with it the concept of being part of a separate religion. My own parents were very religious, but I really don't believe that they were a separate religion. Any minister of the gospel will agree that he is religious, but everyone will deny that he considers his teachings to be those of a separate religion.
Let's look at and define fundamentalism. The term fundamentalist is derived from the Fundamentals, a set of 90 essays published in 12 volumes between 1910 and 1915 by the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. These fundamentals are the foundation of the modern Protestant fundamentalist movement. The volumes defend Orthodox Protestant beliefs and attack all other organizations that do not accept these constructs, be they secular or religious. The following is from the preface of the Fundamentalists' website homepage.
In 1909, God moved two Christian laymen to set aside a large sum of money for issuing 12 volumes that would set forth the fundamentals of the Christian faith, and which were to be sent free to ministers of the gospel, missionaries, Sunday school superintendents, and others engaged in aggressive Christian work throughout the English-speaking world. A committee of men who were known to be sound in the faith was chosen to have oversight of the publication of these volumes. Rev. Dr. A.C. Dixon was the first executive secretary of the committee, and upon his departure for England, Rev. Dr. Lewis Meyer was appointed to take his place. Upon the death of Dr. Meyer, the work of the executive secretary devolved upon me, R.A. Torrey. We were able to bring out these 12 volumes according to the original plan. Some of the volumes were sent to 300,000 ministers and missionaries and other workers in different parts of the world.
The fundamentalist perspective is absolute. All other relevant phenomena are simply explained on their terms. fundamentalism, as a mindset, is first and foremost a mentality that expresses that there is only one truth, one authority, one authentic narrative that accounts for all, and one right way to be. And that, of course, is their way. Further, the fundamentalist perspective deems itself privileged in respect to this absolutism, for it implies superiority of knowledge and truth. Indeed, this is inherent to holding an absolutist perspective. Absolutism is used by many to critique religions. Richard Dawkins, in The God Delusion, gives examples of actions taken by absolutist religious groups.
It has to be admitted that absolutism is far from dead. Indeed, it rules the minds of a great number of people in the world today, most dangerously so in the Muslim world and in the incipient American theocracy. Such absolutism nearly always results from strong religious faith, and it constitutes a major reason for suggesting that religion can be a force for evil in the world.
Unfortunately, there are fundamentalists all over, espousing their brand of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or whatever, and each one claiming to the absolute correctness of their belief. To question their dogma is seen as an attack on them personally, as they do not consider the possibility that they are wrong. The history of what we call Christian fundamentalism in America, and I use America as this is seen by many as where Christian fundamentalism began, may be viewed as having three main phases. The first lasted a generation, from the 1890s to the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. In this period, fundamentalism emerged as a reaction to liberalizing trends in American Protestantism. It broke off, but never completely, from evangelicalism, of which it may be considered one wing. In its second phase, it passed from public view but never actually disappeared or even lost ground. Finally, fundamentalism came to the nation's attention again around 1970, and it has enjoyed considerable growth since then. Fundamentalism isn't restricted to Christianity or Islam, the two major religions on which it has had the greatest impact, but it is found in every major religion, ranging from Judaism to Hinduism to Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. In Christianity, it has overtaken the legitimate sects in influence and has become the dominant force, particularly in the United States, where it controls the Republican Party. In a moment I'll be quoting from Bill Moyes to support this. Also, much of Latin America and in the Christianized African nations. A majority of evangelical Christian sects have succumbed to fundamentalism. According to acclaimed journalist and television host Bill Moyes,
true, people of faith have always tried to bring their interpretation of the Bible to bear on American laws and morals. It's the American way, encouraged and protected by the First Amendment. But what is unique today is that the radical religious right has succeeded in taking over one of America's great political parties. The country is not yet a theocracy, but the Republican Party is, and they are driving American politics, using God as a battering ram on almost every issue: crime and punishment, foreign policy, healthcare, taxation, energy, regulation, social services, and so on.
In Islam, which has always eschewed the separation of church and state, fundamentalism has amalgamated with political forces to institute a particularly harsh set of rules as political law. Called the Sharia, this code of laws is the law of the land in Iran, Sudan, some of the sultanates of the Persian Gulf, and later in Afghanistan. Its advocates threatened to institute Sharia in Algeria, Pakistan, and Egypt as well. In Judaism, Fundamentalist Jews represent about 10% of the Jewish population, but they make the most noise, especially in Israel, whose constitution and the political situation almost guarantees a major voice to fundamentalist sects in parliament and government, even though they are only a small proportion of the population. But there are also extremist religious groups like the Amish, who appear to follow their faith and leave everyone else to follow theirs. They do not appear to exhibit any hypocrisy. For example, on the 8th of October, 2006, New York Times journalist David Brooks wrote,
"A week ago, a local non-Amish man from a small, predominantly Amish community in Pennsylvania went to a one-room Amish school, held all the girls hostages, planning to sexually molest them, and ended up shooting 10 of them, of which 5 have died. At the time I write this. According to one of the survivors, one of the older Amish girls asked this man to shoot her first and spare the younger children. He did so, but didn't spare the others. Although the man was an outsider, he was well known in the community as he collected milk from Amish farmers and delivered it to dairies for processing. Remember that the Amish do not drive. He was a family man with children, tormented by memories of the death of his premature firstborn daughter several years ago, and who knows what other internal demons. When authorities arrived, passers-by called the state police from cell phones. Remember that the Amish do not use phones. The man shot and killed himself. What was the response of this community of religious extremists? Did they exact revenge by attacking and killing their non-Amish neighbors and destroying their farms? Did they declare a holy war against the English and demand the death of their leaders and the obliteration of their communities? Did they rant against the depravity and violence of non-Amish culture and insist the rest of us must embrace their way of life? Did they demand a separate Amish state on the land where they have lived for generations? Did others have to beg them to consider living with their neighbors, even if only in a state of barely suspended warfare?
No.
The first and nearly only response from the Amish community was forgiveness. Their only other public response was to ask to be left alone. Their religion teaches simply and absolutely that all humans are sinners, and that forgiveness of others is a prerequisite to attaining God's personal forgiveness. It is hard for me to believe that all reactions from individual Amish were equally charitable, as they, too, are human. For all I know, I am wrong about this. But forgiveness in action, not just in words, was the community response. Amish representatives visited the wife of the killer, asked what they could do to help, and assured her that she and her children were welcome to stay in the community.
This is a rather long quotation, but I wanted to show that there are different manifestations of religious extremism or fundamentalism espoused by people other than myself. The Amish, it seems, actually follow their belief system of love and forgiveness, which is out of character of fundamentalist groups. In the Los Angeles Times on the 2nd of October, 2009, Neil Gabber, who was working on a biography of the late Senator Edward Kennedy, wrote,
"Perhaps the single most profound change in our political culture over the last 30 years has been the transformation of conservatism from a political movement with all the limitations, hedges, and forbearances of politics, into a kind of fundamentalist religious movement with the absolute certainty of religious belief. I don't mean religious belief literally. This transformation is less a function of the alliance between Protestant evangelicals, their fellow travelers, and the right, though that alliance has had its effect, than it is a function of a belief in one's own rightness so unshakable that it is not subject to political caveats. In short, what we have in America today is political fundamentalism, with all the characteristics of religious fundamentalism and very few of the characteristics of politics.
Why have I written all the above? To show that there is such a movement as fundamentalism and that it is recognized as such. We have the same movement here in Australia, and it is becoming increasingly powerful. You only have to listen to the views of some of our politicians. What is it that attracts people to fundamentalist ideals? Is there anything other than blind faith? When governments neglected to supply the essential and basic services to people, a vacuum is created. Or even when governments neglect to supply services satisfactorily. Enter then a fundamentalist religious group to supply these services. What do they get in return? They get loyalty from those people to whom they are giving or selling these services. It is an economic, therefore a dependent relationship. This is explained by Lawrence Iannacone in a paper titled Religious Extremism, the Good, the Bad, and the Deadly. He explains in economic terms the role of the seller, the religion, and the buyer, the congregation. Iannacone is the director of the Center for the Economic Study of Religion.
A seller, whether of automobiles or absolution, cannot long survive without the steady support of buyers, whether money-paying customers, dues-paying members, contributors and co-workers, or governmental subsidizers. Consumer preferences thus shape the content of religious commodities and the structure of the institutions that provide them. These effects are felt more strongly where religion is less regulated and competition among religious firms is more pronounced. In a highly competitive environment, religions have little choice but to abandon inefficient modes of production and unpopular products in favor of more attractive and profitable alternatives. The output mix depends on the supply of substitutes. So, for example, the growth of the welfare state in Europe and the US has tended to crowd out a church-based provision of higher education, medical care, and support for the poor and elderly. Christoph Reuter's account of Hezbollah's behavior at a public rally immediately following Israel's May 2000 pullout from southern Lebanon is telling. Everyone expected Hezbollah's Secretary General, Sheikh Nasrallah, to announce that he now wanted to take the battle to Jerusalem. Instead, Nasrallah talked about roads, schools, hospitals, about prudence and reconstructions, about infrastructure measures and the power supply. Hezbollah's leadership deliberately pulled back from talk of total war to demonstrate its concern for the social welfare of people.
Iannacone's paper deals in the main with extremist religions in countries not overly supplied with government social services. From the last quote, it is apparent that people will rally behind those who care for them. However, his point on the economic proportion of religious organizations is valid. Some of the fundamentalist religions that condemn Freemasonry have no qualms in selling their wares. Political fundamentalism and extremism. In an earlier paragraph, I stated that fundamentalist or extremist groups controlled the American Republican Party. This brings us to political fundamentalism and extremism. In the past, various political anti-Masonic groups, such as the Communists and Fascists, have accused the Freemasons, in association with the Jews, of being those who would control the world with the New World Order. These groups also represent the extreme organizations that want control of the population. Dictatorships such as those of Nazi Germany, Spain, Italy, and countries under communist control drove the fraternity underground during the early part of the 20th century, and still do in some countries. Writing about fascist Italy before World War II, Dr. Fabio Venzi states,
"During early fascism, there were no signs of hostility toward Freemasons. All changed, however, as a new phase emerged, one characterized by political leadership, mobilization of the masses, the cult of Il Duce, the development of a totalitarian state, and the education of the new Italian. This new phase also saw the creation of a myth of the new civilization, together with the rites and symbols of a new political and lay religion. So it was inevitable that Freemasonry, which also offered a code of conduct for the individual and had its own values, symbols and rituals, would become, to the fascists, an intolerable antagonist.
In 1938, Freemasonry was accused of and linked to Judaism and communism in a conspiracy theory to plan the invasion of Japan.
Judeo-Masonry is forcing the Chinese to turn China into a spearhead for an attack on Japan, and thereby forcing Japan to defend herself against this threat. Japan is at war not with China, but with Freemasonry, represented by General Chiang Kai-shek, the successor of his master, the Freemason Sun Yat-sen.
Following the military coup of 1936 by Franco, who claimed he was the new leader of Spain by the grace of God, many Freemasons trapped in areas under Spanish nationalist control were arrested and killed, along with members of left-wing parties and trade unionists. It was reported that Masons were shot, tortured, and murdered by organized death squads in every town in Spain. No matter where we look in history, despots always use God or gods as their excuse for doing what they do. Their excuse for absolute control is their God. Things have not changed. A priest, one Father Jean Tosquet, is said to have worked for the Spanish fascists and have been given the task of exposing Masons. One of his close associates was Franco's chaplain, and over the next 2 years, these two men assembled a huge index of 80,000 suspected Masons, even though there were only 5,000 or so Masons in Spain. Freemasonry has been linked by fundamentalist groups as being praised and admired by Hitler. Parts of the following quote have been used by these groups to show this. But when Hitler came to power, the 10 Grand Lodges of Germany were dissolved by the Nazis. Many among the prominent dignitaries and members of the order were sent to concentration camps. The Gestapo seized the membership lists of the Grand Lodges and looted their libraries and collections of Masonic objects. Much of this loot was then exhibited in an anti-Masonic exposition inaugurated in 1937 by Dr. Joseph Goebbels in Munich. The exposition included completely furnished Masonic temples. The following is a quote from a speech by Hitler referring to the Church and Freemasonry.
All the supposed abominations, the skeletons and death's heads, the coffins and the mysteries are mere bogies for children. But there is one dangerous element, and that is the element I have copied from them. They form a sort of priestly nobility. They have developed an esoteric doctrine not merely formulated, but imparted through the symbols and mysteries in degrees of initiation. The hierarchical organization and the initiation through symbolic rites, that is to say, without bothering the brain, but by working on the imagination through magic and the symbols of a cult. All this has a dangerous element, and the element I have taken over. Don't you see that our party must be of this character? An order, that is what it has to be. An order, the hierarchical order of a secular priesthood. Ourselves or the Freemasons or the Church. There is room for one of the three and no more. We are the strongest of the three and shall get rid of the other two.
Freemasonry and fundamentalism. Freemasonry has always espoused the right of the individual to freedom. Freedom to decide how they will express their faith. This, alone, is the cause of most anti-Masonic rhetoric from religious fundamentalist groups. In addition, Freemasonry has been accused of being a satanic religion. What follows is a forgery by Leo Taxil, in which he falsely identified as part of a speech and written order which Albert Pike was supposed to have been delivered to Freemasons on Bastille Day the 14th of July, 1889.
That which we must say to the world is that we worship a God, but it is a God that one adores without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors, general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the higher degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black, for the Absolute can only exist as two gods. Darkness being necessary for light to serve as its foil, as a pedestal, is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophical religion is a belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil.
This letter appeared in Paris 3 years after Albert Pike's death. Taxil later admitted that he had written it and passed it off as the work of Albert Pike, Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. Instructions to the 23 Supreme Councils of the World, July the 14th, 1889. In regular Freemasonry, there is no title of Supreme Pontiff, nor is there a Universal Freemasonry organization. Despite this, and the admitted fraud by Taxil, fundamentalist religions still use this as the base to claim that Freemasonry is a satanic religion. This same group of fundamentalist organizations also claims that Pike's Morals and Dogma is the Masonic Bible. This is, of course, to counter what Freemasonry has described in depth in many Masonic writings on the volume of the Sacred Law. One of the characteristics of fundamentalism is the orthodoxy of their own sect's scriptures, and it is typical of most religious scriptures to state that there is only one true religion. Believing in a religion other than the true one is therefore to be opposed to their concept of God. An organization such as Freemasonry, which embraces the concept of religious toleration, must therefore, under these definitions and precepts, have members who oppose God. In some contexts, this means being in league with the devil or being satanic. Therefore, it follows that no member of a fundamentalist group would join an organization with satanic members, and that such an organization must be opposed by whatever means necessary. And whatever means necessary may include lies and deceit, so long as the actions are undertaken in the name of God. All is excused. Recall that torture and execution were commonly used to suppress heresy in medieval times. These people were experts. And also there is the zeal of the suicide bomber. John Krakauer, in Under the Banner of Heaven, looks at the Mormon fundamentalist groups that are a breakaway from the Church of Latter-day Saints. He particularly tells of the two Lafferty brothers, who murdered by stabbing their sister-in-law and her 15-month-old daughter. They did not plead guilty, but admitted to the murders. Their defense was that God had told them to kill Brenda and her child by stabbing. Therefore, they were not guilty of a crime. At his trial, one of the men said, when being faced with the death penalty, "I was willing to take a life for God, so it seemed to me that I should be willing to give my own life for God." Given this faith, what this type of person does or says about Freemasonry, or anything else for that matter, is not surprising. The nature of the fundamentalist, Christian, Muslim, or whatever, opposition to Freemasonry has been simply stated.
It is essentially impossible that there can be any accommodation between true fundamentalism and Freemasonry. For that matter, there cannot be any accommodation between true fundamentalism and any other system of belief. One need only review the history of the demonization of the Catholic Church by Protestant groups in the U.S., or the treatment of Baha'is by Islam in Iran, or the persecution of Jews by just about every other religion, including the pagans, to recognize the pattern. Until religions that have intolerance written into their essential beliefs go away, the battle against religious persecution and thought control is going to continue. Freemasonry is only the latest of many groups to carry the banner of toleration and be struck by the arrows fired by the witch hunters and inquisitors.
Fundamentalist groups seem to feed on references from whoever has written something to support their view. I followed a link from a political party to a church and ended up at a link from the Assemblies of God to a paper by one Teresa Morris, who wrote in that paper, entitled Roots and Links of the Occult, that Freemasons started the Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology, and the Church of Latter-day Saints.
Joseph Smith founded the Mormon Church, which is also called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Smith and his followers were Masons. Mormon priests go through the rituals of the first 3 degrees of Masonry. Mormon sources claim that Masons murdered Joseph Smith. As a result, Mormons aren't allowed to join Masonic lodges, even though their origin is Masonic.
Jehovah's Witnesses was started by Charles Taze Russell, who died in 1916. He was also known as Pastor Russell. Again, this is stated by Morris, who quotes John Daniel from his book Scarlet and the Beast. Again, from Morris.
Masons founded the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Church of Scientology. Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, was strongly influenced by Freemasonry. Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, was a Mason. Some European lodges have admitted women. Theosophy is foundational to much of the New Age movement.
So why have I mentioned Morris at all? The way I interpreted her paper was that it was a critique of churches that had lost the plot as far as she or they were concerned, and that it is the fault of Freemasons. How much one can place reliance on the work of John Daniel, who seems to thrive on anti-Masonic rhetoric, is of course debatable. For instance, he claims that the King James Bible is Masonic because King James was a Templar Mason. Templar? Robert Flood presided over the translation of the King James Version translation team. Robert Flood was the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion and used the French spelling of Sion in the King James Version, and he was a Freemason and a Rosicrucian. I have been unable to confirm that Flood was a member of the King James Version translation team. According to the United Grand Lodge of England, Flood was not a Freemason. I can only leave you to research and form your own opinion. Should you do so, I would be pleased to know your thoughts. Conclusion. I have attempted to share some thoughts on this problem and to show what we have to deal with. The subject is far from being fully covered, but collectively we must take on board this problem and deal with it. I hope I have shown that we, as Freemasons, have to come to grips with the fact of anti-Masonic sentiments by fundamentalists and extremist groups and prepare ourselves to work out answers to the allegations. We can do this best by ensuring that at lodge level we take Masonic education seriously, which we do not do at present. I will leave you with a quotation from a book by Brother J.L. Cowie, published in 1946, 64 years ago. This is the $64,000 question we need to tackle today.
If I were to be asked what I consider is the most pressing need in Freemasonry today, I would reply, schools for Freemasons, or in other words, Masonic education.
By taking this concept seriously and doing something about it, we will be giving our brethren the knowledge and skill to counter this religious fundamentalism and resulting anti-Masonic sentiment. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube @FromTheQuarries.